Hello, I'm Chuck Easley, and I wanted to record a video to respond to a question that a couple of students asked, requesting another video talking a bit more about the lean startup and customer development methodologies. And they were wondering if there were certain conditions or certain contexts where the lean startup or the customer development methodology works better or doesn't work as well, perhaps. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes and talk about this a bit. I think the key first dimension to think about is whether the market and the product that you're thinking about going into are more known area or more an unknown area. And so the first thing you might start thinking about is what kind of market you're in. If you're in a brand new market, if you're in a growth market, or if you're in a more mature market. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to be optimistic and think that they're in a totally brand new market, when in fact they're actually in a fairly mature market or in a closely related market to a known one. But the key thing to remember here is that customer development or discovery-driven planning works better when you're dealing with a highly uncertain, highly unknown situation. So if you're in a completely brand new market or at the very early stages of a growth market, then discovery-driven planning, the lean startup, customer development, these are going to tend to be more effective. If the market is a known market, a mature, established market, then there's going to be greater advantage to people who have worked in that market, who have experience there, and they're going to have already worked out a lot of the customer preferences, the revenue models, the various pieces of the business model that have to be there for this to work. And so in that kind of circumstance, then planning works better, and getting someone on the team who has experience in that market tends to work better. Because if you're sitting there trying to experiment and iterate and reinvent the wheel, and someone else has already done this before, has already seen this movie, and already knows what the right answers are in terms of how to structure the business model, how to do partnerships in the industry, then they're going to be a lot more effective. And there's a paper that I've worked on called Talent versus Experience, where I show this in the data as well. And so there's another YouTube video that I've recorded on my website where I go through these results showing that experienced entrepreneurs tend to have an advantage when they're doing a startup in an industry where they've already previously done a startup or where they're using an older technology. And first-time entrepreneurs tend to have more of an advantage when it's a brand new market or an extremely novel technology, or there's been some kind of major industry disruption that changes a lot of those industry-specific relationships and knowledge and experience that the more experienced entrepreneurs are able to bring to the table. So when you're thinking about this, the first thing to think about is whether you're in a known industry, whether you have a known product, or whether things are really highly uncertain. And in those cases, then the lean startup customer development methodology is going to tend to do better. A lot of people wonder whether the lean startup methodology works as well for physical products versus web or virtual products. And myself, I had this reaction initially that, oh, this is great for virtual products, but when you're doing a biotech or when you're doing a clean energy product, then I'm not sure that this sort of iteration works so well. But I've now become convinced that the methodology can work just as well for a physical product as for a virtual product. There are some differences in the steps, because with a physical product, you have to build a prototype first, and building the actual product and actually distributing it takes a lot more resources. So it's going to be harder for you to get the product into the hands of consumers and something that approaches its final form. But nonetheless, this almost makes it even more important before you invest all of those resources in building the prototype and starting to work out the distribution channels, that you've actually tested whether customers are willing to pay for this and whether the business model is going to work. Bloom Energy is a great example of a clean tech company with a physical product that actually used Steve Blank's book, Four Steps to the Epiphany, in their startup process and used customer development. And even in biotech, you have important business model choices about whether to develop a diagnostic, whether to in-license, whether to develop research tools out of the fundamental innovation. And so there are still these important business model considerations, even with a physical product, that you have to go through. So I think this dichotomy actually, it's important in some ways, but I think that the methodology actually works just as well in physical versus virtual. The next that people wonder about is, is this only for sort of high growth entrepreneurs who are trying to have an IPO, or does this work for small businesses as well? And I think that the fundamental methodology works just as well for small businesses, with the caveat that I mentioned earlier, that if your small business is in a mature industry with a fairly mature product or technology, then you're going to be better off bringing in co-founders who have experience in that industry and with that product, than trying to go through a sort of hypothesis testing kind of formulation, because the market and the business model is more well known, and so then planning is going to work better. But if your small business is in more of an unknown market, uncertain technology, then discovery-driven planning or the lean startup, whatever you want to call it, is going to work just as well. And then a lot of people ask, oh, do we really have to go through this customer development? This is too time-consuming to create these hypotheses and try and interpret the results. Shouldn't we just go out and build the product and see if people want it? Well, the answer there depends on just how cheap and easy it is to go out and build the product. If it's fairly cheap and easy to go out and actually build the product and get the actual product in front of consumers, then yes, but that's essentially your hypothesis testing, and it's going to be a lot more accurate if it's the actual final product. But if it requires a lot of resources, time, energy to actually build the product, then the more that you want to do some kind of testing and some kind of quick and dirty way to begin iterating before you've invested those greater resources that are required to build the final product. So this is a tricky trade-off, because the more quick and dirty your tests are, and the more alpha or beta your prototype is, the less valuable the information. The more that it's the final product, the more accurate a test that you have, but then the more you run the risk of investing all this time, money, energy, engineering cycles into building this great final product, only to subsequently find out that people aren't really willing to pay for it, or the business model isn't going to work. So, it's something that you're going to have to think through in your particular case. Is the test more time, energy, and money than actually building the product? If so, then building it is probably actually the best way to test your business model. Particularly if you have a website, depending on the characteristics of that website, your best test of whether customers actually want this and are willing to pay for it may be to go ahead and build it. You just don't want to go down the road of investing too much time and energy before you really know if this is going to work out. Just one more thing on this last point. There's a great blog post by Manu Kumar at Canine Ventures, where he talks about revenue development and emphasizes that we really need to be testing the revenue model and the pricing structure for products as well. And so it's not just enough for consumers to say that they want it, but there's still a lot of testing and iteration that has to be done around how should it be priced, what should the revenue model be, and so on. And sometimes these are things that you can only really test once you have a more well-developed product. But at the same time, if the revenue model isn't going to work out, or if you aren't able to figure out quickly enough how to get paid for the product that you want, then the business isn't really going to be viable. And then finally, the customer development process or the lean startup is only as good as its implementation by the founders. And so what I mean by that is if you're simply just going through the motions without really thinking hard about what tests you're setting up and really gaining insight from the testing and experimentation that you're doing, then you're almost better off not using the process. On the other hand, what the customer development process or what the lean startup is meant to do is really give you some structure, give you some methodology to put into place things that have been fairly common business wisdom for a long time. And if you're doing things like listening to your customers, if you're responding quickly to their feedback, and building something that people really want and will really pay for, and if you don't make too many assumptions about your business model, if you're scrappy as an entrepreneur, meaning that you try and use as few resources as possible and try and really test if your business model is going to be viable, if you're going to be able to make enough money to cover your costs. If you're following these general principles, then it almost doesn't matter the sort of, whether you call the process that you're going through customer development or the lean startup or whatever it is. But my point here is that the important thing is that um, you are sort of thoughtful about the process and that you're trying to gain insight into what the market really wants, what customers really demand, how the business model should be structured, and trying to learn these things in a rapid way before you've invested a lot in the actual product development and sunk a lot of resources into this. Um, and so that's the last point that I wanted to leave you with, that it's not just about going through mechanically a series of steps, but these steps are meant to try and force you into being thoughtful about your business model, really trying to test whether customers really want this, whether the market's ready, if you have the right revenue model. In almost any business, these are things that you need to pay attention to and that you need to be doing in the course of creating your startup. So I hope that's helpful. Please leave comments or questions and let me know if you want me to go into more detail about something in particular. I apologize for the delay in getting this video out. I've been doing some traveling in China and in Hong Kong. But if you leave me other suggestions of lectures or videos you'd like to see, I'll be happy to respond. Thank you very much.